So, how is it that whenever I go out to this car, I always know where my keys are, but perhaps not my mobile? Why is that? I've got a place where I always put them, haven't I? To finish this phrase, a place for everything and everything in its place. Okay, how about this one? Cleanliness is next to godliness. Right. See, things need to be in their place. There's nothing wrong with mud and dirt if it's in the field. When I was a teenager, I was picking vegetables. I went down and took them to the farm shop. There's no one there, so I walked in, put them next to the counter, walked back out, and I passed my boss, who said to me in a quiet but firm voice, "If I were you, lad, I'd start running." I looked round, and his wife was running at me with a broom. She just put her mop away, having cleaned the shop floor, come back in and my muddy footprints were all over it, and she was about to re-educate me on her purity laws. Fortunately, on that occasion, I outran her. But it's not just dirt and mud and having dog poo on your white trainers and things like that. We like things to be right, don't we, in how we expect them to be. So, for example, if you're in a lift and there's three of you and you're all facing the door, and then someone comes in the next floor and faces you, not the door, you think, "Don't stare at me, turn around." You know, it's not a written law, is it? It's just not right. Turn around, for goodness sake. And we have that expectation on what things will be like. And the temple in Jesus' time had lots of expectations on people, and they had a shed load of rules and regulations, and they had, especially about purity, and they had these purity maps. So there would be a purity map on time, when you could circumcise your child, when you go to festivals, what you do and don't do on the Sabbath. There was a purity map about people, who you could marry, who you could touch, who you could eat with. There was one on things, what can you sacrifice, what can you lie on, what can you sit on. And there was one on food, what you can eat, how you prepare it, how you cook it. If it was written down, there had been 35 pages of rules on how to wash a pot. So there was lots of these rules and regulations. Why? Why did they have so many? And what were they about? Well, the Jews had their law, the Torah, and in that, of course, is the Ten Commandments. And all of these extra rules and regulations were the acquired wisdom of rabbis over the centuries, and they were there to give us a hedge, if you like, so we don't break the laws, the commands of God. Why were there so many? Well, let's think about if you had a really expensive cream carpet in your lounge. You just put it down there. Now you've got one command: do not stain my carpet. Okay? But how do I stop that? So I think, okay, most likely someone's going to spill coffee on it. So let's have rules where you have to have a cup and saucer at the table. You can only fill it 3/4 full. It must never be within 3 inches of the edge of the table, and it must be unattended. What about cups of tea? All right, it applies to all drinks in the lounge. Now what about our feet? You can see, can't you, how lots of little rules and regulations can build up to stop you staining your carpet. It's good to have these rules and regulations, and yet Jesus was always seen to be breaking these purity laws and upsetting the religious people. He's touched a dead person, not allowed. He's eating with tax collectors, not allowed. He's healed on the Sabbath, not allowed. Deviant. Why is he so deviant? And one day they've come out from Jerusalem, these Pharisees and scribes, and they bumped into Jesus with his disciples. And there's a rule where if you eat anything, you've got to pour cold water over your hands first. It's not going to get rid of all the germs, but that was their rule. And I guess they clocked some of the disciples not doing that. Thaddeus or Thomas or whatever, And they get to Jesus, they're going to try and shame him publicly. And they say, Rabbi, how come your disciples don't follow the traditions of the elders and eat with defiled hands? And he's more than a match for them. He says, Isaiah beautifully captured you, hypocrites. When he said they honour me with their lips, but they don't honour me with their hearts. That it's just vain worship. They follow the man-made regulations and not the commands of God. So why was Jesus against these purity rules? Why did he break them? Well, that's the first reason, I think, is that they were man-made traditions. They were rules and regulations that were just like tick lists for them. And you see, the God of the Jews was always interactive. He's a divine God. The Jews saw themselves in this like storybook with their God, and things happened as they interacted with God. So that the appointments of priest and king, prophet, they're all divine appointments where they're supposed to be listening to God for his direction. God's in the story with them. And yes, there might be some rules and regulations for a season, but they're changing because life's changing. And that's one reason why Jesus didn't like it, because these were traditions. But also there were so many of these, there's just so many of these rules. And it was like impossible for some people to follow them. So if you were a very poor person, you'd never be able to have the time or get enough water to do all the ritual bathing. A fisherman could not avoid touching a dead fish. And if you're going across the Jordanian desert, you're not going to pour your valuable drinking water over your hand every time you take a bread roll out your knapsack, are you? Something that was impossible. It's a bit like in your scenario with your beige carpet. What about the 2-year-old? What's he going to do? Well, give him a little tippy cup, put water or wheat juice in, and he'll be fine. No, he's breaking the law. He's got to sit up at the table with a cup and saucer, but he can't reach the table. It doesn't matter. Do you see? He's still breaking the law. Jesus said, if you follow me, my burden is light and my yoke is easy, compared to the dead weight of tradition that the Pharisees are placing on top of you. It was just too much for them. It was too difficult. They were too hard to follow. The third thing was that they were changing the law, because these rules and regulations that were supposed to be there to help you not break the commands of God had become, in their eyes, the commands of God. Yeah? So if I go to your house and my coffee cup is within 2 inches of the edge of the table, I'm in as much trouble with you as if I'd poured red wine on your carpet. I've broken that command. I'm changing the rules. And Jesus picks up also in Mark 7, our passage, that they had other ways of doing that. They had this thing called korban, which meant I could dedicate my property to God and no one else could use it, so my parents couldn't come and use my stuff. And he's saying, that's dishonouring the commandment to honour your mother and father. You're dishonouring them. And you're changing the law in this way, and you're doing that in many other ways too. You see, Jesus wasn't attacking the law. He was attacking those that changed the law. And people might point at the verse that says, well, he says here that you can eat anything, anything that goes into your body is clean, and Jews aren't supposed to eat pork and shellfish. But in this context, Jesus is talking about the purity laws. So anything that's kosher for them as Jews is good for the body. Because what they had in the purity laws was, for example, if you'd made a nice big roast lamb, a whole lamb, and someone mischievous had got a dead fish and touched the ear of your lamb with its dead fish. Right? Happens every day. Your whole lamb is now defiled and you can't eat it. And she's saying, this is ridiculous. All this food goes in one direction, comes out the other direction, and looks the same. And of course they'd missed the main point about purity. It's not what you touch, it's not what you eat, it's what is in your heart, isn't it? It's what's in your mind. It's as well. And he lists this vile stuff that comes out of people's hearts and lives. And the Pharisees, they may have had these rules and regulations where they ticked all the boxes, but they weren't thinking about the wealth and the health of the peasants and how they would cope. They were saying, basically, if you don't follow these laws, then you're out. You're a sinner. And when Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners, the sinners are people that couldn't meet all these rules and are just given up. I'm just going to eat the lamb. I'm just going to eat the food without washing my hands, whatever. They've given up on it. So what can we learn from this? We are called, aren't we, to an interactive faith. It's not just about what all the rules and regulations on our life, but we need to be interacting with God. I worked for about 3 decades looking after the safety documents for nuclear power stations. We have equivalents in America, and they have a nuclear regulator. And their regulator has these codes with thousands of instructions, and as long as for your area you can tick box your rules and regulations, you can carry on operating. But for us in England it's different. We have this higher authority regulator, and they've only got 36 rules, commands if you like, and we have to show them how we're going to meet their commands. So in my area, which is safety documents, how are we going to have safety documents so that whenever I modify the power station, it's going to be safe? And it's interactive with them. It's not just ticking the boxes. It's dynamic, and it's scary at times because they can close your power station down. And it's a bit nervous, but it's exciting at the same time because I'm interacting with the higher authority. It's not just a tick box. And you've got to keep your eyes and ears on what's happening there. Sometimes the rules and regulations we've got just don't make sense, do they? We have to do something different. My first church, Cheltenham, when I was a youth leader, I was doing a youth event, and we wanted to make space there. We moved this big wooden pulpit. It was movable. I moved it back. I got into real trouble with the church secretary. This pulpit must never be moved. Okay, right, tell it off. But isn't that a sort of rule that should be challenged? Why can't it be moved? We need to be interacting with what's happening around us, what God wants of our lives. And sometimes we're called to a higher purpose, a higher love than the rules and regulations. Jesus had a leper come to him, and the leper knelt down and pleaded with Jesus. And he said, "If you are willing, you can heal me." Why did he say that, if you are willing? Because the rules and regulations says Jesus cannot touch a leper. You're not allowed to touch him. You break the laws. You're deviant if you do that. He said, "I am willing." And he touched the leper, and the leper was healed. And it's this law of love, isn't it? Peter and Paul had similar moments in their lives where they had to overcome the rules and regulations in their head to act in love. Peter was asked to go into this home of a centurion and eat with them. And he has his argument, "I can't eat food like they eat. It's not right for me." And God says, "If I say it's clean, it's clean." Peter rose above that because he wanted to love on the centurion and his family and see them saved. And he did, and they were. And then Paul goes out, and he's seeing all these non-Jews becoming followers of Jesus. And he's thinking, what are the rules for them? Do we want them to be circumcised? Have they got to do this and that? So he goes back to the council in Jerusalem, and they thrash it out. Actually, that's not right for them. That's not their tradition. These are the things they should do. Let's do these things. Why? Because they wanted to love on them, because their love for these people were greater than the rules and regulations. Again, I had a pastor once. I don't think he was a regular smoker, but if he visited somebody who smoked, he'd say to them, "Oh, would you like a cigarette?" And he'd smoke with it, and then he'd put them at ease. And I know they loved him for it, because they would tell me that. And that's not something you would do. Perhaps I would do, but do you see what I mean? It was that love for Jesus took him above what he would not normally do. I remember once I was in Macedonia, out in the west, and myself and this lady who's about 70, she was an ex-Buddhist. And her and I were running a service in someone's home. And halfway through my talk, the man pipes up, "Would you like a whiskey?" I stopped, I thought, "Yes, I would like a whiskey." And the lady said, "Yes, I would like one too." I don't drink before, but do you know, at that moment, my love for these people, I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. That's the right thing to do, is to act in love above what my normal rules and regulations say. Because we're called to this higher love, and we're called into this purity of heart and purity of mind. Our natural hearts that we're born with, a lot of bad stuff comes out of them, don't they? We are naturally a bit selfish and a bit greedy, and we want to put others down and do things for ourselves. And we can't patch that up. We need a new heart in Jesus. But once he's created that in us, and we are followers of Jesus, then we need to protect our hearts, and we need to protect our minds, and we need to be careful what we're clicking on and what we're watching and what we're speaking about or gossiping about. We need to look after ourselves and ask the Lord each day to create in us this purity. When Jesus died, what did he leave behind him on the cross? Did he leave behind him rules and regulations, 1,001 things to do? Or did he leave behind himself, his example that we follow? In a sense, he's our everything, isn't he? We focus on Jesus and follow him. So, a place for everything and everything in its place. If everything is Jesus, and that phrase becomes a place for Jesus, and Jesus in his place, and Jesus in our hearts, Jesus in our minds makes us pure. Is cleanliness next to godliness? No, Jesus in our hearts, isn't he? Jesus in our minds is next to godliness, because as we follow him, as we're interactive with God, as we rise above rules and regulations that aren't applying for that moment, then what we see is purity coming out of us, and we see those fruits of love and patience and grace and giving and all those wonderful things that come out of a pure heart and a pure spirit. That's where we want to be, church. So Lord, we just pray, create in me a pure mind and create in me a pure heart, Lord. And help me be interactive with you. Help me to always act in love, and help me be a witness to others and what purity is like. And Father, help me to live this day to the full, being true to you in every way. Help me to give myself away to others. And Spirit, help me to love the lost, proclaiming Christ in all I do and say. Amen.